Today we're basically talking about the Warzone 2, the good, the bad, the ugly. I had an experience to play it early with about 200 creators. Overall, one of the things I liked was the map. I think the map overall looked good. Lighting in general seemed good. Obviously, there might be some dark, cheesy areas that they'll eventually have to fix. It wasn't perfect by any means, but they did incorporate a lot of different POIs as different maps, so similar to like Blackout did, where it had firing range and stuff like that. And I would imagine that over time maybe they incorporate more maps as time goes on, so you get that little bit of a nostalgia feel from Modern Warfare 2, the original, like 10 years ago. With the map, even though we had a limited loot pool, the actual variety, everything was available. You could pretty much run over and get everything as you went through. So it was super easy to find the specific weapon you wanted. I was able to find a sniper in each of the 3 matches. I didn't use a sniper, but I was able to find one. I was able to find an SMG, and I was able to find a rifle and or LMG that I could use for long range. So pretty straightforward, easy to get that together. Now let's kind of get to some of the neutral stuff before we get into the cons, because I don't want to sound like I'm just bashing the game, because there are a lot of cons. So some of the neutral things that I think they could work on are the vehicles. The vehicles have like this weird wonky turn radius, similar to when Caldera first integrated into Warzone, which I think they could just tune those to make them feel like Warzone does now. I think like they want you to make it feel like a tanky vehicle feels slow and clunky and heavy. So they've intentionally done that. IW is super about realism, even at the cost of fun. And that's sometimes unfortunate. I don't really feel like there's certain elements where, does that make it more fun, less fun, or no different? And you got to kind of consider that, because at the end of the day, it's a video game. You want to have fun. Another thing that is a little bit split in the community, I saw a lot of people talking about this, was the 2v2 Gulag. Personally, I went into 3 gulags. I won 2 out of 3 gulags, and you end up with 1 random player. You can get a kill. Maybe you get both kills. Maybe they get the kills and you don't, or you just get wiped, right? But in addition to that, you also get this little key that drops, and you can actually escape through a door, and that's gonna serve as the place of like the capture the flag element that they have currently in the Gulag, where you're able to get that, and then you can escape. So now someone can watch the key, and then they can watch the escape. So it kind of adds that element to it, at least until somebody dies, and then you guys are able to come back, which I don't know if that's good or bad. That's really too soon to tell, but it didn't really need to be changed. 1v1, a nice map, just keep swapping it out. It's a kind of a core element of the Battle Royale at the current moment. Another interesting thing was the triple zones. It happened in 2 out of the 3 matches, where just all of a sudden the map, instead of having 1 big zone that was converging, it said we have 3 zones. And basically you chose one of the areas you were in, or coincidentally you were there, and then those slowly collapsed. And then once they collapsed to a certain point, they didn't collapse to nothing. Once they collapsed to a certain point, then they started to merge, and then you kind of had that last bit of fighting there. And I think that could add an interesting element, but it does end like a little weirdness. I think kind of like one of those things that, could it be amazing? I hope so. But until we get enough reps to really try that out, see if the wins feel rewarding, or is it more RNG, or how does it feel? That one's a little too soon to tell, I think. But I think it is interesting. Like, it's something that I would have never thought of, that maybe it's cool, right? But neutral again. Another thing is proximity chat. It seemed like a lot of people were hyped about that. I think as a casual person playing this game, or even if you play the game seriously, proximity chat's super cool. No matter which way you look at it, it feels super cool. To be able to have that engagement. You could always turn it off, so it's not like you can get bullied or anything like that, right? You can literally just turn off all proximity chat and it won't be an issue. And from a content creator perspective, I think it could lead to amazing comms where people say some crazy off the wall stuff, but it could also be abused by people who want to stream snipe, or maybe play copyright music while you're streaming or something like that, and get your channel striked or something really bad, right? So there are some elements of that could be abused. So from a content creator perspective, I think it's kind of like good, bad, and like it could be great, you know? So I don't know. It's kind of a tricky one. One other crucial part is the movement. The movement is one of these things that people, especially if you're newer to the Call of Duty franchise, you feel like it's unnatural to not have a slide cancel or things like that. But this feels a little bit more what I would call a traditional Call of Duty, which is perfectly fine. I think there's some elements on it that need to be maybe tightened up. Maybe the slide to reduce that sprint to fire time, so you could hit fire at least a little bit sooner while sliding. Maybe the dive, make it a little bit more functional, because right now it's like you just use it across a pathway, and a few things like that. So I don't know, maybe it's kind of one of those weird things that they'll hopefully tune it. I think in pretty much every beta we've had tuning to movement to either make it faster or slower in some way. But I wouldn't envision like we're gonna get slide canceling at any point because the responses that I've seen, there's enough positive that are gonna hold that one that the devs are just gonna be like, all right, we're cool, we could stick with this, but maybe we tune it a little bit to kind of offset the other players that are still a little bit unhappy, but it's not a deal breaker, right? On top of that, we have loadout drops are gone, right? So I think this is a neutral one because if you're a BR purist, you're like, thank God, I think loadouts ruined Battle Royale. If you're a min-maxer and you've watched a lot of my videos, you probably are, and you want, you know, a loadout a second you drop in. All right, cool. You know, you have those two people, and I think it's perfectly fine to remove them, right? They are supplementing it. There's going to be weapon loadout weapons that you can purchase at the buy station. You're going to run up to the buy station. You're going to have an option to buy a weapon, and it will be your loadout weapon. It will be expensive, and you will get that one loadout weapon. If you want both your loadout weapons, it's going to be really expensive because you got to buy both of them. And then maybe if you didn't have your guns leveled, maybe there's an upgrade potential feature. They didn't really dive into it all that detailed, and I wish they would have, because then it would simplified it, because on the broadcast everyone was flipping out like, no loadouts? No, there's going to be ways to get loadout weapons, because initially they're not going to have perks within the game, and I think they're going to just see how the overall feel is, and I think that there's pros and cons to that completely. Obviously having loadouts is super easy content because, hey, here's a weapon. That'll still be the case. Like, you'll still need to have the best weapons leveled. If you want to use them in those first 3 weeks, you're going to be able to go to that buy station and buy your gun, and you get your gun immediately. And there's that part of that. The part that I do not like about the lack of loadout drops, especially like we have in Warzone currently with the 5th zone drop, is when you're on the regain. With this particular model of the game, it's almost like the Gulag isn't worthwhile. It's, you're going to go to the Gulag, you've died, you come back because you win the Gulag, and now you land at a random spot and you have to rely on floor loot. And that is pretty bad. Like, that just puts you in a situation where you're like, all right, well, and this could just be me trying to stay alive for 12 minutes and maybe get lucky, and it could be unfortunate that way. So I think there are some elements to that that impact the gameplay loop in more ways than you would expect just by removing the loadout. It's like the regain portion, no Gulag tokens, no respawn tokens, or any of that stuff. So kind of got that. And then another one did more of a spectating thing was the body cam. It makes it look like you're on the person's shoulder or their head cam, like they had a GoPro attached or something like that. And I don't really care for the angle. And when I was streaming, the chat was basically, what is this? I'm getting nauseous, you know? So I'm not going to show too much of that in the gameplay, but just so you can see it there, it does look a little bit weird. It does give that like visceral, like following it, you're in the action, but nah, it doesn't really work in a practical sense. So even if they would decide to keep it because they invested resources, at least allow it to have the first person perspective, which would make it a little bit nicer, right? And then on top of that, when you are spectating, it has a lack of information. You can't really see the player count, you can't see the mini map, so it's not like you're spectating them from a personal POV. And obviously we've done a bunch of spectating videos on the channel, so it'd be better for us if it worked the way it should, but who knows what they're gonna do with that. And that's a lot of the neutrals, right? We've gone through a lot here, but I wanna get through the cons because it's gonna sound like I'm whining, but I'm not. I'm just giving tons of feedback. If they change nothing, I'll probably still be playing Warzone, right? Like, I'm gonna find a way to see how I like the game, because I'm not really usually the biggest fan of traditional battle royales like a PUBG where you loot for 45 minutes and you get into one gunfight. Obviously there's scenarios that are different, but I'm generalizing, but it's kind of one of those things that one of the things that made COD so good as a battle royale is it was just boom, 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 you're in the action, boom, 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 end a zone, you win, or whatever the case is, and there's almost always something going on. Even if you're more of a passive player, you had an opportunity to play that play style. This one, it's going to be a little bit more unforgiving, so it's going to be harder to come back and get back into the game. But one of the biggest flaws, the absolute biggest flaw, at least in my opinion, for Warzone 2.0 was the looting systems, because there's a couple elements at play here. And one, I think this would work probably perfectly for DMZ, because, you know, the inventory system, those types of things that work sense for like an Escape from Tarkov style extraction game mode. I think there's a lot of things that work better for that. But the looting system, I don't mind that we have a bag, but I think they should really compromise and find a place in the middle, because you have your general inventory that is on your person, and then you have a backpack that holds additional inventory. And with this system, it allows you can hold as many plates as you want, because you get your 3 that takes up the inventory, and then if you want to hold 3 more, you just put them in your inventory, and they're in stacks of 3. So you could have 3, 6, 9, 12 stacks of plates, and that's it. But it's going to take up your inventory slots. You could have a frag grenade, you can have a Semtex, a Claymore, and a Prox mine all on your person. As soon as you use those 2, the other one will backfill, and it'll backfill, and that allows you to have that. But you could also hold 3 clusters in a precision if you manage to find them with the UAV all at once, which could be a little bit tricky to balance. And the ammo, the ammo also takes the place of that inventory. So if you're just running around looting, you accidentally pick up shotgun ammo, or you accidentally pick up an SMG, or whatever the case is, and then now you decide to get your loadout weapon, which is a rifle, and you weren't carrying rifle ammo. So it's very similar to Apex, where you have to store the allotted ammo for your specific weapon type. So that makes sense. Games do it. But in addition to that, even though on screen it just looks like, hey, this is Apex's looting system or something along those lines, I've played Apex and I played this. Apex feels infinitely smoother to actually use the items. And grab items and loot, it was infinitely easier. Blackout even had a system that felt better and more intuitive and less clunky. This thing needs a ton of optimization. I think it can work. Ideally, in a perfect world, I think that you should be able to just run over ammo. Ammo should be one of those things that they're really not worried about. And then maybe utilize those perks or those bag slots for plates, precisions, lethals. Maybe you want to have claymores on a door and prox mines. You can place them all down, I guess. I'm not sure how that's going to work, but it makes it for an interesting gameplay loop if they want to combine those things. It just gets a little bit tricky in the pacing, because there was a point where I did not understand this element while I was playing, because it was like my first match or second match, and I had a nade, and then I go to pick up a Semtex, and then I'm like, oh, but my inventory's full, so I have to grab it and then swap it with something else, and it's just like, that's taking like 5 or 7 seconds. Obviously, later on, we could probably get it in 2 seconds, but how much harder is that to do than just to press X over what I see on the floor, and I either swap with what I have or I don't. The inventory system does create a little bit of hiccups that I'm sure we'll work through, but it just needs a ton of optimization, and that's a key. I don't mind if it's there, because Apex has it and it works good and you got to get used to it, but this thing was clunky as hell because it's not even in a list the way Apex has it. That makes it super easy to read and super smooth, and it goes to the left of your screen on Apex, versus this goes right in the middle of your screen and blocks that vision. So these kind of go hand in hand. One of the things they talked about was the specific loot location. So for example, if you wanted a bunch of cash, maybe you go to a bank. If you wanted a bunch of weapons, you maybe go to a military. I'm talking Vernance style, right? If you wanted plates and heals and those types of things, maybe you go over to hospital and they'll have a supply of that. And you kind of go through those things, right? So us not knowing, hey, this is where you should go for that, obviously it's going to feel like, later on we would have a quote unquote meta location to land, and since the loot lands is at the same spot every single time, you could literally have a planned route that you do every single time, which some people will love, but others will hate. And then when you are looting, it made it pretty difficult because the chest and all the loot doesn't really make much noise, if at all, almost none, no noise. So you could be looking through a building, not find anything, or you know, it could be really tricky where you're looting from one place to the next, to the next, to the next, and there's really doesn't feel like there's anything, because you use audio as a huge part of that within Warzone to identify, I can loot this area, I can get a chest open, I can get 500 cash, try and get my teammate back. This didn't have that feel at all, which I think is kind of a bad thing. The other thing is the AI in this mode is just unnecessary. I understand they want to do this thing with the strongholds and gas up, but I feel like that's a DMZ thing entirely, because they do scavs and all those things in Tarkov, and I get that. It makes sense for DMZ and the looting and but for Battle Royale, I think it makes zero sense, and you are adding something to the game that is for another mode that will probably be amazing. right? But it's at the detriment of your core game mode. And they did this before. They did it with multiplayer. They made everything perfect. Say loosely, but they made everything designed for the battle royale at the detriment of their multiplayer, and the multiplayer suffered heavily by having the worst multiplayer experiences year after year after year. But it was okay because Warzone was fine, and I think that is a horrible way to go down, because you're kind of like just throwing everything away and banking on one mode instead of trying to make them all great. And I think they seem super hyped about DMZ and they're super secretive about it, but if that ruins Warzone, like, and not enough people care about DMZ, you're kind of screwed, right? Like, especially if the multiplayer is still kind of screwed from the Warzone mechanics, right? So, I mean, there's a little things there, but it is what it is. Buy stations are overly clunky, needs to be super simplified. It shouldn't be these big old boxes. It should do it kind of the listing. If we do it, you go through the list, you click, and it'll open up another list. I think that's fine. I think the UI is just kind of ugly. And then you can only have a limit of certain items you can buy. You can only buy one UAV per buy station, I think, which is kind of weird if you want to kind of just hold on to that. Especially since nobody's going to have perks, it will work. Nobody's going to be able to hide off your UAV. It's going to 100% work. But with the AI, it gets a little bit clunky because there's so many AI over the map. It clutters your whole everything. So it's almost like the UAV is not useful, which I can understand them doing that on purpose. The other part that is probably another very frustrating part is pretty much every quality of life change that is objectively good in the game. I maybe some are very close to a little bit debatable, but objectively good in the game just are non-existent in this. There's no balloons. There's no portable buy stations. There's no portable balloons. There's no lootable perks, which is like, that's my favorite part of like Warzone now, is like go through, you get this, oh my God, I got tempered, you know? It's like one of those, like, I think that's cool. The gas mask, the animations, it's the original from Warzone where you're going to fall if you're, so even though it's not perfect now, and they at least give you options to toggle it on and off, this basically threw all out of the window. Satchels are non-existent, and they've actually incorporated satchels into the plate system, which I didn't even talk much on at all. But when you load in, you're gonna have the opportunity to have 2 plates, and combined with the health is 100 health, right? It's not the changed health. The TTKs felt very fast because you're gonna have your 2 plates and then your 100 health. So it's like you have 200 compared to Warzone right now. We have 300 when you combine them both. And then when you find a satchel, it's not gonna allow you to hold more armor plates. It's just gonna allow you to put on an extra armor plate. And with that, it's still gonna work with the 3 stacks. So that doesn't matter. You could have 3 there and then 3, 3, 3. And your inventory could be full of like 6 of these satchels and you didn't even realize it because you felt like they were plates. And your inventory, you gotta really understand. Obviously that's something you'll learn, but you could have 6 of those and have no plates because you filled your inventory. So it gets kind of wonky there. And I think, it's kind of one of those things like, why are we doing this? It's a little bit like Blackout in the sense where you could have level 3 armor. But at least with that, there was a visual where I can go, okay, I know I'm going to shoot this guy. And I know he has a little bit of extra tankiness because he has this level 3 armor. Versus, oh, I started shooting him. I felt like they should die, but they actually have an extra plate, so they're going to die an extra 2 bullets or something like that. It gets a little bit wonky. The zone closings in general felt really slow, especially with the reduced player count. The map is fairly big, and there's like 102 players on the map. That's what it was in. They didn't tell us any different. They said it was 102 when we loaded in, and I would hope that that's not the case, because if you have slow zones, that many people, it's like you're going to go to huge sections of the map without ever running into anyone. And that's the bulk of what I had. But on a closing note, I know it might sound dumb, but I think it's very unfinished. Like, there's still a lot to work on. Obviously, there's some that will get fixed. The core part of the game, which is the map, was good because they don't really need to change much there. But I would almost recommend that if they cannot get a lot of these things figured out, it needs to be delayed. And not just a month or 2. Push it to March or something. I don't care. I want the best experience possible. And I know what happened with Caldera. You guys were there for it. You may have already stopped playing the game and you're just trying to see what's going on now. You made it to this point in the video because you really want to have a good game. You don't want to happen with the Caldera. It didn't play on consoles very well. There was tons of bugs, dev errors, crashes. There was so much trash on top of trash on top of trash on a potentially very good game but it got totally tainted. So I hope that that doesn't happen with this, because there are so many things that they could mess up that we're not ready, that for me, I'm like, there's no way I could play this. If it launched exactly like this, be a little bit rough. I'm sure people at the studio are gonna watch the video, so feel free to comment whether you agree or disagree. I don't care. No, neither of us are right. They're all opinions at the end of the day, but I think there's certain things that would help make the game better, and that's just more my opinion. Hopefully you guys enjoyed my thoughts. Appreciate the support. Thank you for watching as always. Have a great day.